Every year, in fact every week, we read the same book, which is called the Torah. But what is Torah? What is this book? Is it a book of Jewish law? Is it a book of Jewish history? What is it? Most traditions in Judaism today don't follow the text of the Torah. 2,000 years ago, in the time when the temple stood in Jerusalem, people followed many of the Torah laws. Our festivals looked like they are described in the Torah. Our everyday life was like in the Torah. But then, after the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era, and when it became clear that it will not going to be rebuilt anytime soon, we had to adapt. Jews were dispersed around the world, and almost all we know today in Judaism had to be reintroduced, reinterpreted. Early rabbis took the leadership and reshaped our tradition, introducing prayer instead of animal sacrifice, and other types of offerings, and introduced many other changes in all aspects of our lives. So for today's Judaism, Torah is not the book of Jewish law. Is Torah a history book then? I'm going to cite you or tell you a story, and my question is, do you recognize it? God tells the main character, which is a man, a secret story about a plan to cause the flood. There is a commandment to demolish his house and build a boat, regardless of the costs, or to keep living so that all living beings will be alive. The boat must have equal dimensions with corresponding height and length, and it should be covered over. Carpenters, reed workers, and other people assembled one morning, and 5 days later, the man laid out the exterior walls of the boat of 120 cubits. The boat had 6 decks, divided into 7 or 9 compartments. The man loaded all the living beings that he had on the boat. The boat was sealed, and the flood began. Do you recognize this story? What is it? Right. I heard the correct answer here. I just quoted you the flood myth in the Epic of Gilgamesh. On December the 3rd, 1872, George Smith took the podium at the Society for Biblical Archaeology in London to deliver the most important lecture in his life. The theme of the lecture was discovering the ancient source of the biblical flood. In a wide and complex plot written on 12 clay tablets, the plot of Gilgamesh, Smith found a story very similar to the story of the flood in the Torah that predates even the Exodus from Egypt. Dr. Gabi Barzilai studied this myth and compared it to the Noah's flood story, and found that all the similarities, and noted that with all the similarities between the stories, there are also important differences. In the Gilgamesh text, the flood is a caprice of the gods. In the Torah, it is a punishment for sins of humankind. In Gilgamesh, the survivor is a king who had connections and power. In the Torah, the survivor is a righteous and blameless person. In Babylon, the gods of the flood lose control over the tremendous power they have unleashed. In the Torah, God is in full control. Dr. Barzilai offers a theory that the Torah deliberately used a well-known and famous story, perhaps the most famous story of the time, to highlight and sharpen the important differences between the worldviews of the ancient Near East and the new spirit of biblical monotheism. In the face of power struggles, which is reflected in polytheism, when gods fighting with each other and trying to understand who is the main god and trying to organize plots against each other, the Torah expresses clear values: righteousness and justice, equality and people's responsibility for their actions. There are many other examples when Torah text does not reflect the objective historical account of the past. In other words, Torah is not a history book. So what is it? It's a book that contains stories, narratives that makes us think, ask important questions, and test our values. Noah, the main character of this week's Torah portion, is not a historical character, but his life and decisions can help us to think about power, about our responsibilities to save the world, about belief in humanity and notion of good and evil, arrogance and compassion, prayer. This service begins your bat mitzvah. In Judaism, there are two types of commandments. One type is in between me or you and God or your spirituality. And the second type of commandments is between you and other people. All relationship with other people are the matter of law of the country we live in. And in this regard, you are not an adult yet. Probably I am not yet too. But today is the time when you become responsible for your relationship with God and your spiritual life. Today you receive the narrative of our people, and you become a part of the chain of the transition of this narrative. You read and learn stories of our people with your family, with your teachers, and there will be time when you will be responsible for telling them to next generations. Today we live in the world of so-called attention economy, when the most important currency is not money, but your narrative, the story you tell. And a good illustration for it is when you take a good picture of any product, of, for example, good shoes. It used to be, when it is a really good picture with a really good photographs, that the company that wanted to use it for their advert, they would pay you to use it. Nowadays, they wouldn't. They would tag you on Instagram. And the fact that you are mentioned on some important and fashionable brand is more important than money. So your narrative, the story you tell to the world, the story people hear about you is important today. You receive the Jewish story today, and you can choose to use your story as a weapon, as a tool to gain power and control, or you can use it as a reminder of most important values, the values of responsibility, repentance, justice, mercy, care for the earth, and many, many others. There is a beautiful quote from the book of Proverbs that we use at the end of the Torah service, and we will use it tomorrow morning as well. And I think it summarizes it better than I will ever be able to. דרכיה דרכי נועם, וכל נתיבותיה שלום. עץ חיים היא למחזיקים בה, ודומכיה מאושר. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. It is the tree of life to those who hold upon it, and happy is everyone that holds it fast. Shabbat Shalom, and Mazal Tov, Freya.